All right, thank you for staying with us on Citizen Weekend. And as promised, I'm joined by Professor John Mukum Mbaku, who is a Brady Presidential Distinguished Professor of Economics at Weber State University, and he is joining us from Salt Lake City in Utah, United States. He also co-authored Governing the Nile River Basin, the search for a new legal regime with the late Kenyan scholar Mwangi Kimenyi, and we're also joined from Kisumu by Dr. John Rao Nyaoro, who is an international consultant, Transboundary Waters Policy and Legal Framework, former Executive Director, the Nile Basin Initiative, formerly Director of Water Resources in the Ministry of Water and Irrigation, which made him Chief Negotiator for matters Transboundary Waters, inaugural CEO of the Water Services Regulatory Board, and he has a PhD in water law from the University of Nairobi. All right, gentlemen, and they're both Johns, as it so happens tonight. But I'll start with you, Professor Mbaku. As I understand it, the volume of the Nile is only 5% of the Congo River. Why has the construction of Gerd, the grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, been such a contentious issue between Ethiopia and Egypt?
Well, thank you for the opportunity to participate in this conversation. There are several reasons, but one of the most important is that the Egyptians see the Gerd as a structure that might interfere with the flow of water from the Blue Nile into the Nile River. The Egyptians depend on the Nile for more than 90% of their freshwater resources. And the Blue Nile and the Ethiopian highlands provide over 86% of the water that flows into the Nile. So the fear in Cairo is that if Ethiopia is able to successfully construct this dam and start operating it, it might be inclined to try to maximize Ethiopian objectives at the risk of harming Egypt by preventing water from flowing into the Nile. I think this is primarily the argument given by the Egyptians against the construction of the dam. And so when the Ethiopians announced in 2011 that they were going to construct the dam, the Egyptians immediately started making efforts to prevent them from doing so. Unfortunately for the Egyptians, the Ethiopians were able to successfully construct the dam. And so today, what Cairo is interested in is trying to find a way to have an agreement with Addis Ababa on how to manage, how to operate the dam so that that operation would not have any negative impact on the flow of water to Egypt and the Egyptians. This is the primary issue.
All right. I'll ask you now, Dr. Nyaoro, to come in. As I understand it, there was a treaty that was entered into in 2015. But if you read the report, you had President Trump, for instance, seeking to mediate between Egypt and Ethiopia as late as 2020. Why is that?
Thank you very much for bringing me on board to this discussion. We have actually what we call the Nile Basin Cooperative Framework, which was negotiated by the 10 Nile Basin states. That includes Ethiopia, Sudan, Egypt, Kenya, Rwanda, Burundi, Uganda, Tanzania, and DRC Congo. Eritrea only participated as an observer. The idea of coming up with this agreement, the Nile Basin Cooperative Agreement, actually it is called Nile Basin Cooperative Agreement 2010. And the idea was actually for this agreement to supersede all colonial agreement, 1929 agreement, which gave Egypt veto power, which was signed by the British on behalf of the countries which they were under administration, all the East African countries. including even Ethiopia. And that agreement gave Egypt veto power that no construction, no development on the Nile River can be done without the approval of the Egypt. But that time, the British did not share all the waters of the Nile, 84 billion cubic meters for the two countries. They actually left 32 billion cubic meters. Egypt was given 48, and Sudan was only given 4 billion cubic meters. The rest 32 were left, which were not allocated to any state. Then came 1959. Egypt and Sudan came bluntly and shared the entire waters of the Nile. Egypt this time got 55.5 billion cubic meters, and Sudan got 18 billion cubic meters. They only left 10 billion, which were for aquatic life, assuming that there was no any other countries in the Nile to use the water. While the water, the Blue Nile contributes 85%, and the White Nile, which is from the East Africa Lake Victoria, contribute 15%. That alone tells you there was something wrong. That was the need for coming up with a new Nile Basin Cooperative Framework, which was actually negotiated and signed and came into force by 2015 by the Nile Basin state. Egypt and Sudan did not sign this agreement, though they took part in the negotiation. The argument was their water security was not taken care of. That is where they are up today.
All right. Professor Mbaku, let me ask you this. I read that Ethiopia, okay, they started the project in 2011, but apparently during the Arab Spring, so essentially, and then moved ahead with the project despite Egypt's reservations. Despite in 1978, Anwar Sadat stating that they're ready to go to war to defend the lifeline that is the Nile, because I think it provides, as you stated earlier, 90% of its freshwater needs. So does this move by Ethiopia to open Gerd open the door to other countries? Because the Nile goes through, I believe, 11 African countries. They technically all have a stake in it. Does this open the door for them to take advantage of the Nile?
Well, I wouldn't say take advantage of the Nile. There are 11 countries, and those 11 countries have a legal right to the use of the waters of the Nile. What the problem is at the moment in the Nile Basin is that Egypt and Sudan are using what a bilateral agreement, which was signed in 1959, to basically have total control over all the waters that flow out of the Nile. No matter which law you look at, whether you look at international law or you look at the cooperative framework agreement that the previous speaker just spoke about, you see that that type of approach by Sudan and Egypt is not tenable, is not equitable at all, because all the 9 upstream countries, those which include Ethiopia, they are the countries that contribute water to the Nile. To allow Egypt and Sudan, regardless of the difficulties that they may face in terms of access to water, to allow the two of them to monopolize all the waters of the Nile does not seem equitable at all. The Nile River is a river belonging to 11 countries, and each one of them has a legal right, a legal claim to the waters. Now, the nature of the claim is something that can be discussed and negotiated through a treaty. And that is what the Nile Basin Treaty was supposed to do, to provide an opportunity for these countries to come together and take into consideration the difficulties that Egypt faces, but also take into consideration the development needs of Ethiopia and all the other countries like Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, and so on and so on, take into consideration their own development needs and then allocate the waters accordingly to take into consideration both the development needs of each country and the difficulties that countries like Egypt that live in the desert have, and come to a mutually agreeable treaty. And I think this is what the cooperative framework agreement was trying to do. And unfortunately, the Egyptians and the Sudanese refused to sign it because they wanted a guarantee that would allow them to continue to use the waters of the Nile as they have done since 1929 and augmented by 1959, which I think will not be attainable. And as many of these other countries develop, their populations increase, and climate change becomes a problem, the needs of these countries are going to become exacerbated, and I think that it is time for them to sit down and negotiate in a much more reasonable manner, putting aside those colonial-era agreements.
All right. So you say they need to sit down and agree. So I'll ask you now, Dr. Nyaro, now that the deed is done and the dam is operational and it's generating hydroelectric power, does Egypt now have no option but to live with it?
Yes, thank you very much. Actually, now the dam is on. There are now two big dams on the Nile, the Gerd and the Aswan Dam. The Aswan Dam. Now, Egypt has got no alternative but to agree to come to the table, cooperate with all the Nile Basin states for equitable and reasonable utilization of the Gerd, so that they can also benefit. There is a lot of benefits from that dam, not only by Ethiopian alone. Okay, being the developer, they have the highest benefit. And the benefits for Ethiopia include, one, they will get cheap electricity. They will get cheap energy for their people, and also for their industry, and also to spur their economic and also rural development. For the two Nile Basin states, Sudan and Egypt, why they have to cooperate, they have got also a lot of benefit. Take, for example, Sudan. When the Gerd was not there were a lot of floods which were affecting Sudan all the way from Khartoum. This Gerd has now stopped that kind of flooding. There were a lot of sedimentations that were clogging the irrigation canals in Sudan. This dam now is trapping all those silt, and their canals will be able to give clean water and for irrigations. When there was this no dam, what we call the base flow, the flow during the dry season was very low, that even Sudan could not be able to use it for irrigation. Even Egypt itself was being affected because there was no that continuous flow. With the dam on, with the Gerd dam on, there's what we call regulation of the flow, because they have to produce electricity 24/7 throughout the year, which means there is a minimum flow that must be there to generate 6,500 megawatts. And also hydropower generation is non-water consumptive. That means that water will be continuing regulated, going to Sudan, all the way to Egypt, to their Aswan Dam, which they will be able to continue using for their irrigation, domestic, and all their industrial need. What is now needed is cooperation. This cooperation will give them all the benefits, because the Gerd is actually not only going to benefit Ethiopia. The hydropower 6,500 is more than what Ethiopia needs. It will be able to benefit even the East African country, including Kenya, which can import that cheap kind of power. And again, even Sudan, actually, during the negotiation we discovered, Sudan does not oppose this Gerd. They are only opposing it because 1959 agreement they entered with Egypt. They said any issue on the Nile, they must go together. But Sudan is saying, actually before the conflict in Sudan that is ongoing now, Sudan had already agreed that they also wanted to import that hydropower because they saw the benefit was more than the effect the dam is going to do to them. So today, Egypt has got no any other reason but only to negotiate, cooperate with the other Nile Basin states so that they will also be able to enjoy the benefit. Because that will be able to give them peaceful coexisting with all the basin states, including Ethiopia, which has got huge benefits. And they will be able to continue. Since the dam has been operating, they have never cried that the water is not reaching them. Water is reaching them. That means it has been tested, proved. I can give you a good example. In Kenya, Ethiopia was developing on River Omo the Gibe 3. In Kenya, we cried that they are going to be able to deny the water that comes to Lake Turkana, because it gives 90% of Lake Turkana was going to dry. That time, I tried to convince our fellow countrymen that hydropower generation is non-water consumptive. It is they are going to generate water at electricity at Gibe 3, and the water will be able to continue.
Okay.
Today, even the level of Turkana is even higher because there is a continuous flow that comes from the Omo River that used not to be there sometimes. And also the benefits which we are enjoying in Turkana, if the dam is up there in a cool place, the evaporation is reduced. The same on the Nile and the Gerd. The Gerd is in a cool Ethiopian island where evaporation is low as compared to the Aswan Dam, which means they are saving millions and millions of cubic meters of water, which could have been lost through evaporation.
Right.
So cooperation is the only way so that they realize equitable and reasonable utilization of the waters of the Nile from the Gerd, and also enjoy the benefit of hydroelectricity that is being generated.
All right. I want to thank my contributors this evening, Professor John Mukum Mbaku, who is a Brady Presidential Distinguished Professor of Economics, Weber State University. He also co-authored Governing the Nile River Basin, the Search for a New Legal Regime. And we've also had with us from our Kisumu studio, Dr. John Rao Nyaoro, who is an international consultant on transboundary water policy and legal framework. Thank you very much, gentlemen. And we will post this interview on our Citizen TV Kenya YouTube channel. Let's take a break.